Well, hello once again, boys and girls. And it's time for another edition of Mr. Henderson Plays Video Games You've Never Heard of while talking about Romeo and Juliet. Today's edition for Act 1, Scene 3 is we're going to play Super Mario Brothers 2. Now, in the video game lore, this game is kind of the forgotten Mario Brothers, and there's a reason for that I won't go into. But I've chosen this game because we today are going to be playing as the Princess Peach. And in a lot of ways, the Princess Peach is kind of representative of Juliet, who becomes our focal character in Act 1, Scene 3. So we're going to pick the princess here, and let's talk about her slash Juliet from Act 1, Scene 3. Yeah, Peach. Yeah, raise your hand. Yep, there we go. Let's go. As we fall through the doors. Great. So, Act 1, Scene 3. It opens as kind of this reverse scene of Act 1, Scene 2. Because in that scene, Lord Capulet and Paris open, and they're talking about the idea of marriage. And they're talking about the idea of Juliet getting married to Paris. Well, in Act 1, Scene 3, it's kind of reversed, where Lady Capulet and the nurse are talking to Juliet herself about the idea of getting married. So, the Capulet family wants Juliet to get married to Paris. And as I've talked about, he is, by all accounts, a nice guy. And if there's one character I feel sorry for, it's the Count Paris. And this is the guy that they are trying to set Juliet up with. There's nothing wrong with Paris. He's charming. He's got money. He's got everything you would want in a guy. And as we talked about in the last act, or last scene, arranged marriages in this time were not uncommon. So they do mention, and they bring this up for the second time in this play, how old Juliet is. She is only 13 years old. Just keep that in mind. Greatest love story ever told is with a 13-year-old, and even in Shakespearean times, still a little young. But they're talking about, well, it could work. Paris is a nice guy. Let's make it happen. So the nurse and Lady Capulet kind of go back and forth about this. Now, the nurse is an older character who was actually Juliet's caregiver growing up. And one thing that the nurse kind of reveals is that she actually breastfed Juliet, which, science is not a super common thing to have happen. Usually, it's the mother that does that. But in the, Shakespearean time, not as uncommon as you might think, because the Capulet family was off having to do Capulet things like fight the Montagues. And so, I guess just didn't have time to breastfeed Juliet. So the nurse goes on this long, winding rant, and this is something she is prone to do, much like Mercutio is also going to be prone to do when we kind of get introduced to him in the next act. She goes on these long, winding rants that eventually they just have to go like, all right, that's enough, nurse. Like, we hear you. Let's move on. So they ask Juliet, and they go, all right, Juliet, we got this guy. We got Paris for you. He's by all accounts a nice guy. What do you think about I'm gonna die here, just like Juliet's gonna die later in the play. Spoiler alert. Except it's not really, because they told you in the prologue. So they ask Juliet, they're like, hey Juliet, what's your opinion of marriage? And Juliet kind of gives this response where she's like, I don't know. I haven't really thought about it. Which, to be honest, is a very their response because, again, she's 13 years old. And the Capulet family kind of has this response like, what do you mean you haven't thought about it? Like, of course you've thought about it. Like, how have you not thought about it? She's like, because I haven't. So, where this scene kind of leaves off is they tell Juliet, all right, there's going to be a party that's upcoming, and here's what we want you to do. We want you to look at all the guys at the party, and if you can come back to us and say, you know what, there's nobody better than Paris, fine. But what they want her to come back and say is, you know what, you're right, fam. Paris is the guy for me. And the last little line in this scene is Pita, the servant, comes running in, and he's like, hey, like, guests are getting ready for the party, like the party's about to begin. Keep in mind, this party is the exact same day as the fight scene. Everything so far has been all in the same day. So we leave this off with preparations for the party, and the fam telling Juliet to look at some dudes at this party and make sure that Paris is the one. So tomorrow we're going to pick up with Act 1, Scene 4, and hope you've enjoyed another edition of Mr. Henderson Playing Video Games while talking about Romeo and Juliet, and I will see you next time.